congratulate. Big thanks to Findlay Honda in Centennial Hills for making this video possible. Check out their Instagram and website, links in the description below. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're comparing the previous generation, the 10th generation Honda Civic, to the brand new 11th generation that came out with the 2022 model year. Now this is a 2019 Honda Civic LX, comes as the lowest level trim, comes with a 4-banger naturally aspirated, pushing out 158 horsepower, 138 pound-feet of torque. And let's see how this bad boy drives. We're going to be keeping this as somewhat of a baseline and comparing the new generation to this one. All right, so first impressions, this car definitely feels like it is from the 20-teens, a budget car from the 20-teens. I've always loved Hondas in that Honda does driving dynamics right in a very well-balanced kind of way. But you get into this car and you're not fooling anyone. This is a budget build. You have cheaper interior materials, a lot of these hard plastics. Cloth seats, I don't mind. In fact, I like that they have these this little center trim piece to the seats. It makes it a little bit more interesting. But the way this car drives and feels, even the really hard texture of the steering wheel, you can tell that this is a budget car. You're not really fooling anyone. But that being said, Honda does it better than most other players in the game. In traditional Honda fashion, the steering is quite accurate. Of course, it's pretty devoid of feedback, and this category of car, that's what you'd expect. The brakes are actually quite grabby. The first few minutes I was driving, it actually took a little while to be smooth with the brakes, because that first centimeter of brake pedal travel is almost 0 to 100, if you will. Now, having a CVT, I'm obviously not the most enthused, but that's where the industry is moving, especially in this class of vehicles. And Honda CVTs are at least less infuriating than the Nissan CVTs that I've been driving. This model has a sport mode, which will set the revs higher before the virtual shifts. And again, the engine and transmission is identical between this and the newer generation. Redline is at 6,700 RPM. Not the smoothest engine. Honda has definitely made smoother engines in the past, but it's also not terribly rough. It doesn't detest you for revving it out near redline. It's been a few generations since Honda has incorporated double wishbone front suspension. This is strut front suspension, as is in the newer generation. Although this has 16-inch wheels and the newer generation comes with 17-inch wheels standard, so I'm wondering how that's going to change the driving dynamics, the comfort, the ride quality. As the industry moves towards larger and larger wheels, we get thinner and thinner sidewalls, which makes things a little bit stiffer. In terms of ergonomics and seating position, this is something that Honda does typically get right. I'm 6'1", mostly in the legs, and I have about, let's say, 3 inches of headroom. And even with longer legs, I'm able to telescope out the steering wheel enough such that I'm comfortable. I'm not sitting too far up. A lot of cars in this class of vehicle, you sit really high up, it feels kind of awkward. Here, I feel like I'm in the car at the right position, not too high, not too low. The ergonomics and seating position are just right, such that they kind of fall into the background. You don't really have to worry about them. Interior is definitely showing its age with this really small screen. This is what, like 4 or 5 inches, lower resolution. Well, we have physical touch controls, which I definitely appreciate, especially with your HVAC controls. That's a nice touch. The dash and speedo is digital, but this is an earlier generation digital speedo, and it actually looks decent. It doesn't look bad at all. A lot of cars from this era tended to have lower resolution and very painful to view digital dashes, but this is fine. This is absolutely fine. Now, I know a lot of you are eager to see the thoughts on the newer generation Honda Civic and how it compares to this. So let's just get on the highway here. Let's test the road noise at speed, and then we'll get into that new 2022 model. Oh yeah! Power! All right, here we are. 75 miles an hour. And we're right around 65 to 66 decibels. Yep. Right around 65 decibels, cruising at 75 miles an hour. Now on to the 2022 Honda Civic Sport. This is the 11th generation. This is one trim higher than the LX that we just tried previously. And I gotta say, this is a handsome car. This car looks much more adult, a little bit more minimalist, a little bit more mature, more simple, elegant lines rather than being overly angular and overly styled. Very handsome car, especially with these black 17-inch wheels. Really quite a looker. And let's see how she drives. Yeah, wow. First impressions, this car feels like a completely different class of vehicle than the previous generation. This 11th generation is so much more refined, so much better put together, and it just feels more adult, if you will. Not just with the exterior styling, but even the interior and the way it drives. I love this interior honeycomb design, this flat minimalist line that goes across the whole front, and that's something that they're bringing to a lot of their new cars. It's a newer Honda interior design language, and I like it. I like it a lot. Even the steering wheel is kind of a blend of modern with retro, which is very cool. Even just the material on the steering wheel is a little bit softer leather. It feels nicer. The car is quieter driving around town. We now have paddles on the CVT. Like, everything just feels a little bit more buttoned down, well put together. And even driving on these, slightly windy roads, you can feel that even though it weighs 150 pounds more than the previous generation, it feels lighter. It handles its weight better. It is a more nimble car. Very good body control while still remaining comfortable. I was concerned a little bit that the 17-inch wheels would be problematic, but it's still quite comfortable. I think it looks better with those 17-inch wheels. Nice tight turning radius. The dash is nice. You have the left side is digital, the right side is analog for speed, but it's a high resolution digital, so it doesn't seem too jarring. They seem similar enough. Even though it's the same engine and same CVT, it definitely feels like they've changed the tuning a little bit for it to behave a little bit more naturally, as you would expect with a more traditional transmission. So it's a little bit more predictable, which I enjoy. Brakes are so much more natural feeling. In that previous generation, they were a little bit too grabby. It was hard to modulate and be smooth with them. And this, not a problem at all. Feels very natural. Visibility is also quite impressive, especially in a modern vehicle. These A-pillars aren't as thick as I would expect, and because I can sit lower in this car compared to the previous generation, I feel like I have a nice glass house effect. I can see quite a lot here in the front and on the sides. And that's a good remedy to I feel like a lot of people are getting CUVs, SUVs because they want visibility, because a lot of cars are getting more cavernous and more difficult to look out of. And this is the antidote. This is the remedy, having cars like this. Steering is also quite a bit lighter. Overall, the inputs feel a little bit better dialed in and balanced. I'm not sure if you can tell, but even having this gear selector, it's slightly tilted to the left, so it's a little bit more ergonomic. It's also not in the center of the tunnel. It's actually towards the left, so you don't have to reach as far. Those small little touches they culminate in making a much more cohesive driving experience. A little bit rough on some of these larger bumps, which could be in part due to those thinner sidewalls. The lighter steering does feel a lot more natural. Front-wheel drive are getting a little bit of understeer there. Again, McPherson strut front suspension. This is not a dedicated sports car, so this is all par for the course. Let's get this up to speed and see how we do with the sound level. At 75, we're at 66 decibels, which is 1 decibel higher than the other generation, but again, there's a little bit of error in these measurements. The car feels quieter driving around town, but I suppose on the highway, at least according to my Apple Watch, the SPL meter is saying that it's the same audio level, same amount of road noise. Oh, nice brakes, nice and easy to modulate. You do really have to applaud Honda for keeping their cars so light. This car has grown a little bit of a cordification, if you will, where it's gotten a little bit longer, a little bit wider, a little bit lower, and yet it's still sub 3,000 pounds. And in this day and age, that is harder and harder to come by. So kudos to Honda for doing that. And this car does manage its weight, which is it's a pretty light car, but it still manages its weight quite well. Better than the first generation, which was 150 pounds lighter than this. Again, we have cloth seats with this center stripe design to make it a little bit more interesting. Some leather trim on the sides. Good comfortable seats. They seem to have slightly more lateral support than the previous generation, but overall still comfortable. No issues here. Headroom seems actually a little bit more, and that could be because I'm able to sit a little bit lower in this car, maybe 3.5 inches. Bringing it back to the interior, even the fit and finish on these switches, these are metal. They feel great. They have that really tactile nature. In a world where everyone is going more and more digital, they kept the analog where it counts, where it's important, like on your HVAC. You even have this great tactility to it. Metal touch. Larger screen. Having keyless entry and ignition now comes standard. We have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto as standard as well. Even when you change these drive modes, I like this. What a playful little sound. Gotta love that. The colors also change on the dash depending on Sport being red, Eco being green, of course. Overall, such a massive step up from that previous generation. Really impressed by what Honda was able to accomplish here. Now overall, as a car, this would make for a fantastic daily driver. Obviously, if you're getting this, you're not going for a full-on dedicated sports car feel. But this has a very good balance. Yeah, look at that. Great trunk space. Overall, a really good balance in being a car that is comfortable, is dynamic, is refined. Now, I wish it did have a little bit more power. It's definitely lacking in that arena, but this is not trying to be a sports car. This is your comfortable daily driver. If you do want something that is sporty, you can go up to the SI and then eventually the Type R once that is released. In terms of the interior, I'm not sure how much I love this interesting pattern texture. It's almost like carbon fiber, fake carbon fiber, but not quite. But at least they're not doing piano black, because piano black does get pretty nasty. Piano black here has held up well, but the reason being that this is not a frequent touch point. This car has 15,000 miles on it, but the piano black here is in an area that you're not really touching, and therefore it can stay pristine, not really scratched up, not really nasty and gross. It's a very grown-up car, and a huge departure from what Honda Civics have been in the past. Thanks for watching, my friends. Much love, and I'll see you guys in that next one.